One of the easiest ways to learn about how car engines work is to know about all the different parts, but focus on the parts which are different in different engine configurations. If you're new to car engines and how they work, this is really the simplest way. Now, if you're an expert, please come along for the ride. I guarantee you will learn something. So let's start with pushrod engines, single overhead cam, and dual overhead cam. These are really the three primary engine configurations. If you want to start learning about cars, for example, you could start with the most complicated dual overhead camshaft, which for a four-cylinder would be two camshafts for the one bank of cylinders. Now, when you go to V6 or V8, you'd have two camshafts for each bank of cylinders for a total of four camshafts. That's sort of where it gets a little more complicated. Is you have pushrod engines, which always just has one camshaft inside the block directly above the crankshaft. Single overhead cam, you have one camshaft per each bank of cylinders with one crankshaft as well. And dual overhead cam, you have one crankshaft with two camshafts for each bank of cylinders. So really, if you wanted to know the basics of which engine works best and which one is best for you, first just understand you have to pick a valve train configuration. So single overhead cam is probably the best of both worlds. It has a crankshaft driving one camshaft on each side of the engine bay, and then it has the camshafts controlling the intake and exhaust. So if you want to think of like your heart or your lungs, you intake air and then you exhaust air. Your heart pumps blood and filters out the blood. So really, the more advanced you get with the valve train, the more advanced the performance gets at the higher RPM. So if you just want a low range, like for towing, for example, a pushrod engine is really all you need. And Chevy and General Motors still make that in their Silverado and their Sierra. Now, if you want the best of both worlds, a technology that's really gone away is single overhead, which really Honda and Chrysler and Ford are really the three companies that used single overhead camshaft mostly in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. This was the dominant powertrain for four-cylinder and six-cylinder engines for low range, mid-range, and a little bit of high-end performance. Then when the emissions got more strict, this is where dual overhead cam, and I think this is where people get really confused with. Dual overhead cam is really good for high RPMs, but it's mostly being used in these big companies because of the fuel-saving technologies and meeting the emissions requirements. It's not because it costs less to make, and it's not because they necessarily all want to do it. Kia, Hyundai, all these companies have to put dual overhead cam in the engines so you can have the variable valve timing and meet those high fuel economy restrictions.